Payroll is still the number one expense on an income statement as a business owner, outside of just about everything else. Unless you're in the restaurant industry, sometimes your food costs can exceed it. But in general, payroll, it is your biggest expense. So I'm going to show you the differences between W-2 workers and 1099 workers, show you what it takes to be a W-2 versus a 1099. And I'm also going to explain, why do so many business owners and just people in general that favor 1099s over W-2, why are they shifting away from the W-2 and trying to shift them all the income to 1099? The short answer is money. It is very expensive to run payroll. It is expensive. It is compliance driven. You have to hire oftentimes professionals. There's all sorts of HR. So that is the main reason, but I'm going to show you the mathematical reason and the difference between the two. So here's obviously what a W-2 looks like versus a 1099. So the best way I can show is I took one of the pay stubs for someone that we process payroll for. It's a few weeks old. This is what it looks like. Now, you will see that the gross is $2692.31. In this example, you're going to see the 4 taxes that most people will take out from their paychecks. Now, this is from an employee side. You have gross, and then you have net, what actually credits your bank account. The 4 taxes are, they're going to be federal income tax, depending on how you fill out your Form W-4. Social Security, that's fixed, 6.2%. Medicare, it is 1.45%. And then Arizona income tax, which is, we're in the state of Arizona, is going to be 53.85. Now, if you're in a different state, you may not have any income tax, or if you're in California, New York, one of the higher tax states, you can see it much higher. When Arizona, it's a lower tax state, so that's what it is. So this is a normal pay stub. As you can see, you have a gross, then you have a net. And then, of course, the employer is going to have a burden that I'm going to cover. So if I show you what it looks like, here's the employee side. So on the employee side, the total taxes that we just listed off are $774.63, or 28.7% of the gross. Very expensive. Now, what does it actually cost the employer to run this payroll for the employee? Well, I'm going to show you. On average, we call it a burden, an employer burden. And on average, we see it running about 13.87% of the gross. What does that mean? That means that as an employer, you're going to spend about $138.70 for every $1,000 worth of wages. So, and the reason you have this burden is you have to match the Social Security, the Medicare, and then you have to put in money towards the state unemployment and the federal unemployment. On top of that, you're going to have some payroll processing, and the most important one is workers' comp insurance, which varies depending on industry. If you're in the construction industry, workers' comp is going to go up. If you're an office clerk, it's going to be much lower. But on average, we're seeing 13.87%. So in the example that I gave you, this 2692, if you add the employer burden of 1387, that means that it's $373.42 on top of the gross, or it's going to be $3,065.73 for you to run this 2692 for your employee. Very expensive. On top of that, you have to file reports every single quarter. And then on an annual basis, you have to issue the W-2s, 940s. There's about 5 or 6 different reports on an annual basis. So it's very compliance driven and a lot more involved. Now imagine if you happen to be the employer and the employee, so you have an S Corp and you want to run a payroll for yourself as your reasonable compensation, and you want to run this payroll for yourself. Well, it's going to cost you, the business, $3,065.73, which is an expense. I get it, but that's what it's going to cost you for you to net $1,917.68. So now that is, depending on how you calculate it, could be 42% of the gross or 60% compared to net, because your taxes are $1,148 1705 combined with the employer side and the employee side, and you're only getting 191768 in this particular example. So that is the employee and employer side and on W-2. So why do people shift so much of it towards 1099, which a 1099 that I showed you, it's very, very straightforward. It just looks like this. How would you do it? Very simple. There's no compliance. You just cut a check for $26.92.31, give it to your worker, and year end, you just give them a 1099, and then that is it. Now the worker will then have to pick up the $26.92.31, and if they don't have any expenses, they will be subjected to the self-employment tax, which is the Social Security and Medicare times 2, 15.3%, and then they'll be paying their federal income and state income tax. So the number one reason people shift away from the W-2 is to save money and headache. They don't want to spend the money on compliance. They want to save money on the taxes. And I have put together 20 questions straight from the IRS that typically helps you correctly answer the question whether the worker is a 1099 or a W-2. Now, these are the 20 questions straight from the IRS. I'm going to put a link in the comments, free for you to download. So if you're curious, if you've been miscategorizing your workers, download this. It could be very, very helpful, because getting it wrong, I'm going to go through what can happen if you get it wrong and what I have seen in my experience. But let's just go down the line here. If you look at number one, question number one, in most cases, will be enough to disqualify most 1099 workers. Because if the workers complying with instructions about when, where, and how the work is to be done, if you answer yes, this could indicate an employee relationship. So go down the list. What's the service provider personally? I mean, there's a lot of them. Most people that I have seen are miscategorizing their workers. Now, what is your risk? You're like, you know what? I've been doing this for so many years. What is the risk? Well, the risk is that any one of those workers can go and file an unemployment claim. They can file a Department of Labor claim, and they can actually file their taxes with the IRS. And there is an election in a box they can check and be like, hey, IRS, I think I've been miscategorized, because they're hit with this huge bill of Social Security, Medicare, federal tax, income tax. And they say, hey, I think the money that I received gross should have been net, and they failed to withhold taxes. Now, this rarely happens, but it could happen. So you're jeopardizing your business if your model is to take W-2 and shift it into 1099. And there's been a lot of cases throughout the US that's happened, and they paid a lot of money. So download this, review how you're paying your workers, and make sure you get compliant.